To lay siege, for armed forces to surround a fortified position and block all paths of entry, an effective tactic used throughout all of human history. The besieging army usually has all the advantages, as the now isolated location is at their mercy. But why storm the gates and climb the walls and lose significant portions of your forces when you can simply starve them out? Why subject yourselves to archers and traps when you can catapult plague-ridden bodies over their walls? Living during a siege is one of the worst situations you could find yourself in. Maybe peace can be arranged, but it's rare the side with the upper hand does not strike with it. While there are countless devastating sieges that have occurred in history, that's not why we're here today. No, it's not the bloodiest or longest sieges I want to tell you about, but the unusual ones. These are sieges that stand out in history for a bit of a different reason. These are 3 strange sieges. I hope you enjoy. If you're a comic book or superhero fan, the name Themiscyra may sound familiar to you, as it's the hidden, flourishing home of the Amazons, including Wonder Woman. However, it's also the mythical home of the Amazons in Greek mythology, the legendary warrior women who thrived without a male presence. Now, while Themiscyra has a mystical attachment to it for the ancient Greeks, it was also a real city that existed in ancient times. And although the fiction of it is certainly strange, the real history is as well, or at least what ancient historians told us. Really, I speak of one instance in particular that was likely just as baffling to hear back then as it is today, and that is actually the siege that destroyed the ancient city. The Romans in 72 BC were plundering their way through Pontus, an ancient Hellenistic kingdom that existed on the southern coast of the Black Sea in modern-day Turkey. Led by the famed Lucullus, the Romans stormed their way through whatever stood in their path, and Mithridates VI was helpless to slow the bleeding. This was the Third Mithridatic War, meaning the 3rd time the Romans had fought this king of Pontus, and they had had their fill. Along their march through Pontus was the city of Themiscyra. Like many before and many after, this city, despite its mythical image, would fall to Lucullus and the Romans. However, it was during the siege that something extremely odd happened. Like many besieged cities, the walls of Themiscyra served as both their barrier of protection and their new prison walls. The Romans, however, weren't going to play the waiting game and decided to take the city by force. This was done partially by gigantic towers for soldiers to leap over the walls and into the city, but Themiscyra was also breached via underground tunnels dug by the Romans. These massive tunnels were quite impressive and allowed for many men to pass through, as well as bloody battles to be fought within them. Men from both sides could meet in the dark corridors and have enough room to engage in melee combat. This close-quarter style of fighting still favored the well-equipped and well-trained Romans, however. Still, the defenders of Themiscyra unleashed every means of defense they could. Knowing the existence of the tunnels, the city defenders cut openings in the top and rained hell down from above. This was in the form of wild animals, including bears and swarms of bees. The dark tunnels were flooded with the vicious beasts, who now served as guardians of Themiscyra, ensuring the subterranean battlefields would not be without true chaos. No doubt this was a terrifying encounter for the Roman soldiers, who would have been helpless to escape from the teeth, claws, and stingers of the enraged wild animals and bees. Despite the valiant efforts by man and animal, the city ultimately would fall to the Romans, who of course would also win the larger war as a whole. Richard the Lionheart is outside the gates. There are probably few phrases more frightening for a lightly armed castle. In 1199, the legendary King of England was already a veteran of crusades and wars. However, the 41-year-old warrior king still had a taste for battle. When a revolt by a viscount saw the king and his army ravaging the French countryside as part of a larger war with France. Despite it being Lent, what should have been a time of peace, Richard and his forces devastated the viscount's land with fire and sword. In March of 1199, the king and his forces set their sights on a certain castle. Rumors of a treasure trove of forgotten Roman gold have always persisted but can't be confirmed. It's also possible the castle simply held strategic value in Richard's mind. Whatever the case is, Richard was determined to take the castle. And taking that castle should have been an easy process. Inside was only around 40 people, including women and children, and to defend it was only 2 knights. To make matters worse, the walls were already in serious danger of falling apart completely. It's clear they had no hope of halting the Juggernaut army before them. However, even an ant can irritate a lion, and perhaps even be capable of more. One of the knights was a young boy whose name differs depending on the source, but the most popular seems to be Peter Basile. Now, seeing this young boy on the ramparts would likely have been a humorous scene for the besieging army. The defenders were ill-equipped for the task ahead of them, and Basile famously had a frying pan as a shield. It was clear the castle already belonged to Richard before he even stepped foot inside. However, maybe it was this lack of perceived threat that caused Richard to do what he did next. One evening, the king walked to the perimeter of the chateau to observe the siege's progress, and took little precautions in doing so, as he did not put on his armor, instead relying on a shield. The young Basile was the only defender on the ramparts, and had been given an unusual opportunity. He grabbed his crossbow and fired it near the Lionheart, who applauded the effort. However, this left him vulnerable to a follow-up shot, as he could not bring his shield up in time, and the bolt struck him in the shoulder. Richard calmly walked back to his tent to remove the bolt and treat the wound. Had this been done properly, it likely wouldn't have been all that serious. However, the surgeon is said to have botched the removal of the tip, butchering the king's shoulder before finally removing the entirety of the bolt. The wound turned gangrenous, and it was clear to Richard his days were numbered. The castle had meanwhile been easily taken, and the king on his deathbed asked for the young boy who shot him be brought before him. However, Richard was not spiteful, but actually respected Basile. The boy told Richard that he shot him because he killed his 2 brothers and his father. The English king pardoned him, demanding no harm be done to his killer, and that he be given 100 shillings. Richard the Lionheart would die not long after, within 12 days of being shot, a king vanquished in his prime, with so much conquest left unfinished. Had this young French knight with a frying pan shield not killed one of medieval time's most legendary and successful kings, history likely would have played out much differently. With Richard's death, so too died his mercy. Praeger was the leader of a mercenary group loyal to Richard I and a close friend of the king, and this deed could not go unpunished. All of the castle's defenders had been hanged, but for Peter Basile, Praeger had a worse fate planned. He was flayed alive, his skin agonizingly cut and peeled from his bones, before he was eventually hanged, and his torment brought to an end. In 1137, the Holy Roman Emperor was dead. As the Emperor Lothair III also reigned as King of Germany, that throne was now vacant. Conrad III was elected as the new king, over Lothair's son-in-law and heir, Henry the Proud. Now Conrad was a part of the prestigious Hohenstaufen dynasty, and Henry was a part of another prestigious dynasty, known as the Welfs. The 2 houses would soon be at arms against each other. Henry refused to acknowledge Conrad as king, and as punishment the German king stripped away his lands and gave them to those loyal to him. However, even without the titles, Henry's people and the people under Welf rule in Germany still followed their prince. The resulting civil war was the start of a long and bloody affair. Henry the Proud would actually not last long, as he suddenly became ill and died while in his 30s. This left his son, Henry the Lion, who was just a child, to carry on his legacy. Henry was supported by his uncle Welf VI in the continued war effort. While fighting against Welf, Conrad's forces besieged the city of Weinsberg. The battle between the 2 great houses was a decisive one, resulting in King Conrad's victory. The Welf forces were crushed, and their hopes were also crushed when their relief force was destroyed by Conrad's army. The city surrendered and peace terms were arranged, although they would not prevent the king from punishing those who were disloyal to him. One of the conditions was that the women may leave the city unharmed with whatever they could carry. Provisions and valuable possessions were what was expected. However, the faithful wives had seen a loophole that they may exploit. The German forces were taken aback as the women emerged from the gates, carrying their husbands on their shoulders. While many weren't thrilled by this action, the king himself was actually amused, impressed by the cunningness of the wives. Not only did he let the women and husbands go, but he also let the whole city go, abandoning his plan of imprisoning those within. In one of the few times in history a besieged city was simply allowed to leave in peace, the wise and loyal wives of Weinsberg were able to save the day. Sieges are often a drawn-out, bloody affair, resulting in large-scale destruction and loss of life. While usually a straightforward affair, sometimes strange things happen. Thanks for watching.